The late afternoon sun hung low over the desert town of Dry Creek, painting the dusty streets in hues of burnt gold and blood orange. A dry wind carried whispers of sand along the wooden sidewalks, rattling shutters and stirring the scent of sagebrush. At the edge of town, a solitary woman rode slowly on a chestnut horse, her wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over her sharp, thoughtful eyes. She was tall, elegant in a rugged way, and her long, dark hair flickered in the wind. Her name, at least for the moment, was Evelyn Hart, though she had lived many names over the years. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the horizon, where the jagged ridges of the Sierra Mesa met the sky. She was searching for something or someone, but part of her feared what she might find. Her fingers brushed the leather strap of her satchel, inside which lay a small bundle of letters, yellowed with age and sealed with fading wax. Letters from a man whose name she dared not speak aloud, yet whose memory had never left her. The Apache. She had returned to Dry Creek under the pretense of business buying land, tending to old claims, but the truth was far more personal. Years ago, she had met him, Taye, a young Apache warrior who had saved her life during a cattle raid gone awry. Their connection had been electric and fleeting, a spark in the vast emptiness of the West, and then he had vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. Evelyn had never known if he had remembered her, if the bond they shared had survived the distance and the years. Now, standing in front of the Rusty Spur saloon, Evelyn dismounted, her boots kicking up dust as she tied her horse. She smoothed her jacket and entered the dim, smoky room. The saloon was alive with the clatter of glasses, laughter, and the occasional strum of a piano in the corner. But Evelyn's eyes scanned only one spot, the far corner, where a man sat alone, polishing a revolver with careful precision. Taye. He had changed. The years had sculpted him into a figure of quiet strength. The sharpness of youth had given way to the calm of a seasoned warrior. His long black hair, streaked with silver at the temples, fell over broad shoulders. Tribal beads and leather straps decorated his arms, telling silent stories of battles fought and victories earned. But it was his eyes that caught her, breath deep, dark, and piercing, yet carrying a shadow of something he had not shared with anyone else. Evelyn's heart pounded as she approached. She had decided, weeks ago, on a dangerous gamble. She would pretend not to remember him. She would speak to him as if they were strangers, to see if he remembered her, their shared nights under the desert stars, the dangerous escape through the canyons, the promise neither had dared to speak aloud. "Taye?" she said softly, letting the name fall like a feather. He glanced up slowly, his eyes narrowing in recognition, or was it suspicion? "You know me?" he asked, his voice calm but guarded. Every muscle in his body seemed poised for action, yet his hands never left the revolver. "I don't think so," Evelyn replied, masking the tremor in her voice. "I'm new in town, just passing through. Maybe we've met somewhere?" She offered a polite, enigmatic smile, careful not to give herself away. Taye's gaze lingered, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Maybe," he said finally, his voice low. "Maybe I've seen you in another life." Evelyn felt a thrill of both fear and hope. He remembered. Something in the set of his jaw, the intensity in his stare, hinted that the memory had never left him. But she had to know more, had to see if he would act on it, if he would remember the unspoken promises of their past. A sudden commotion at the saloon door drew their attention. A group of rough men, guns at their sides, laughing with arrogance as they swaggered in. Evelyn's hand instinctively brushed the hilt of the small pistol she kept hidden beneath her jacket. Taye's hand was already on his revolver, his movements fluid and precise. The tension in the room shifted. Electric and dangerous, yet in that moment, Evelyn felt something deeper, a recognition that went beyond words. Their eyes met, and in the silence between gunshots and laughter, an unspoken understanding passed between them. She had come back to Dry Creek to test him, and in his gaze she realized she might already know the answer, but the desert held its secrets tightly, and Evelyn Hart had learned long ago that even memory could be treacherous in the Old West. The saloon's door swung open again, letting in a gust of wind that carried the scent of dry earth and distant rain. Evelyn Hart remained seated at the bar, pretending to sip slowly from her glass. Yet her eyes never left Taye. He had returned his attention to his revolver. But she noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faint furrow of his brow. He was remembering. She could feel at Taye why he had always been a man of few words, but his silence spoke volumes. Evelyn's plan was simple: feign ignorance, test whether the bond they shared had survived the years, and see if the memories of their past, the nights under the desert sky, the narrow escape through the canyon, the whispered promises still burned in his mind. "Whiskey," Taye finally said, his deep voice cutting through the ambient chatter of the saloon. The bartender slid a glass toward him without a word. Evelyn's fingers twitched, barely noticeable, as she adjusted the brim of her hat. She approached cautiously. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her tone polite, as if they were strangers. Taye's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and calculating, and for a moment she felt the weight of the desert itself pressing down on her chest. "Be my guest," he said, his voice neutral. But there was something behind the words, something that betrayed his calm exterior. Something old, familiar, and dangerous. Evelyn seated herself opposite him. She let the silence stretch, letting him observe her. She noticed how the flickering lamplight caught the contours of his muscles, how the tribal beads on his arms seemed to vibrate with his restrained energy. She had always been drawn to him, and even after all these years, she felt that magnetic pull, the invisible thread that bound them across time and distance. "So," she began casually, "I hear this town has seen better days." She forced a smile, though her heart raced. Taye's hand never left his revolver. "Depends on who you ask," he replied quietly, not breaking eye contact. There was an edge to his words, a subtle challenge, as if testing whether she belonged here, whether she had earned the right to speak to him. Evelyn leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I've been told stories," she said, carefully choosing each word. "Stories of a brave Apache warrior who saved a woman's life years ago. Strange that I'd hear that here." Taye's eyes darkened. For a fraction of a second, recognition flared across his face. Then he masked it with a calm that belied the storm inside. "Stories have a way of changing," he said. "Sometimes they grow taller than the truth." She bit back a sigh. The gamble was working. He remembered. But would he admit it? Would he speak the words she had longed to hear? Evelyn needed him to act, to reveal that the memory of her, of them, had endured. Before she could press further, the saloon doors banged open again. A group of bandits, rough and armed, swaggered in, breaking the delicate tension between them. Instinctively, Taye rose, his movements fluid and precise, eyes scanning for threats. Evelyn felt a surge of admiration mixed with longing. Even now, he was the man who had protected her once, who had faced death with quiet courage. The bandits' laughter echoed through the room, but Taye's presence seemed to bend the air around him. One of the men stepped too close, and Taye's hand rested lightly on his revolver, not yet drawing, but ready. Evelyn's breath caught. She had seen him like this before, under the harsh sun, with danger closing in from every side. Yet this time, she wanted to see if he would also remember her, recognize the bond that had never truly been broken. "You seem familiar," Taye said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I can't place you." His eyes never left hers. Evelyn's heart leapt. She leaned closer, letting the faint scent of sagebrush and leather brush against him. "Maybe you will," she said softly, letting the words hang in the smoke-filled air. "Maybe some memories. Take time to surface." He studied her for a long moment and then nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a challenge she had thrown down. Somewhere deep within, the past stirred. And Evelyn knew, with both excitement and dread, that this dance between memory and pretense had only just begun, outside. The desert wind howled across the empty streets of Dry Creek, carrying with it the secrets of years gone by and the promise that some ties could not be broken even by time or distance. The wind outside Dry Creek carried the sharp scent of creosote and dust, stirring the tumbleweeds across the empty streets. Inside the Rusty Spur Saloon, the tension between Evelyn Hart and Taye had become almost palpable. They had spoken little, yet every glance, every subtle movement spoke volumes. Memories lingered between them, unspoken and electric. Waiting for the right moment to surface after the brief confrontation with the bandits, Taye had returned to polishing his revolver, but now he kept glancing at Evelyn. She maintained her composed, distant demeanor, but beneath it, her heart raced. The gamble she had set in motion, pretending not to remember him, was working. Taye remembered. The question was, how far would he let the memory guide him? Evelyn rose from her chair, claiming she was stretching her legs, and walked to the window overlooking the desert. The sunlight cast long, jagged shadows across the town, painting Dry Creek like a forgotten painting. She traced her fingers along the cold glass, her mind drifting back to the night they had first met. She could almost see it, the moonlight glinting off the canyon walls. The sound of rushing water as Taye had pulled her from danger, his arms strong and sure around her. "Evelyn," Taye's voice broke through her reverie, calm but low, carrying the weight of unspoken questions. She turned, her eyes meeting his. You do know me, don't you?" Her breath caught. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than she expected. She kept her face neutral, hiding the small smile that threatened to break free. I think I've seen you somewhere," she said softly, letting the words hover in the air. "Maybe a long time ago, in another place." Taye studied her, his dark eyes narrowing, searching for the truth behind her carefully measured tone. Every instinct he had screamed that she knew, that the memories of their shared past had never left her. And yet, she tested him, just as he had tested fate all those years ago. A sudden clatter from the back of the saloon drew their attention, a small group of townsfolk arguing, a crate tipping over. The noise seemed trivial, but it reminded Evelyn that danger was never far away in Dry Creek. She turned back to Taye, deciding it was time to probe deeper. "Do you ever remember the desert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The nights under the stars, when nothing existed but the canyon, the fire, and the wind." Taye's hands froze on his revolver. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she had pushed too far. But then he leaned back slightly, the shadow of a memory crossing his face. "I remember," he said simply, voice low and steady, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. "I remember every detail, every sound, every scent, even the fear." Her heart surged. The connection between them, fragile but unbroken, had begun to awaken. She stepped closer, letting the warmth of her presence fill the space between them. "And me?" she asked softly, almost breathless. "Do you remember me?" Taye's eyes darkened, a mixture of longing and caution. He studied her for what felt like an eternity, as if trying to decipher whether her words were sincere or another layer of the game she had set. "I remember you," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "You were the first person who ever made me question everything I thought I knew. And I haven't forgotten." Evelyn's lips curved into a small, triumphant smile, though her heart still raced. The man before her, the Apache warrior, the protector, the enigma, had remembered. And now, the dance between truth and pretense could begin to unravel. A sudden shout from outside snapped them both to attention. Bandits, horsemen, perhaps trouble brewing at the edge of town, it didn't matter. The desert always had a way of testing those who dared to linger too long in one place. Yet in that brief, stolen moment, Evelyn and Taye felt something rare, a connection that had survived years of separation, danger, and silence. Evelyn knew the road ahead would be treacherous. Taye, too, had his burdens and secrets. But now, as their eyes met again across the saloon table, she felt something else: hope. The memory they had shared had survived. The bond between them had endured. And perhaps, just perhaps, the desert had finally brought them back together for a reason far greater than either of them could yet understand. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying whispers of the past across the sun-baked streets. Inside the saloon, two souls, bound by memory and courage, faced the uncertain future together, ready to confront whatever the Old West might throw at them next. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the jagged hills surrounding Dry Creek, leaving the town bathed in a blood-orange glow. Evelyn Hart mounted her chestnut horse, her fingers tight around the reins as she scanned the horizon. She had spent the better part of the day watching Taye, observing the way his hands moved over the revolver, the subtle glances he cast toward the town's outskirts. Something in the air told her that trouble was coming, but the unspoken tension between them had shifted. He remembered, and she could no longer hide her own feelings beneath polite pretense. Taye appeared at the saloon door, his shirtless torso catching the last light of day, the tribal jewelry around his neck and arms glinting like embers. His eyes, dark and intense, followed her as she moved toward the outskirts. "Evelyn," he called softly but firmly. She stopped, glancing back at him. There was no question now he knew her, and he cared. That subtle, unspoken recognition between them was stronger than any words. "I think it's time we leave the town for a while," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "Something's coming." He nodded, his expression grave. "I felt it too," Taye said, mounting his own horse. The silence between them was filled with a shared understanding. Years of separation had done nothing to break the bond forged in the desert long ago. They rode hard into the fading light, the wind whipping through their hair, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. The townsfolk they passed gave them wary glances, two strangers, a woman and an Apache warrior, moving with purpose. Evelyn's heart beat faster with every step. Knowing that Taye's presence brought both protection and the dangerous allure of their past dot, by the time they reached the edge of the mesa, the first signs of trouble appeared. Smoke rose in the distance from a small homestead, and the sound of shouting carried faintly on the wind. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "They're attacking," she said, pointing toward the rising flames. Taye's jaw tightened. He nudged his horse into a gallop dot as they approached. The scene came into focus. A gang of bandits, heavily armed, ransacking the property. Cows scattered and a small barn was set ablaze. Evelyn's stomach tightened, but she stayed calm, drawing a deep breath. Taye, meanwhile, moved like a shadow, fluid and silent, assessing the situation before committing to action. "Stay close," he whispered to her, eyes scanning every corner. "I've got this." But Evelyn had never been the type to hide. Drawing her own small revolver, she followed him, keeping low behind rocks and fences, her eyes fixed on the bandits. They moved with a terrifying coordination, but Taye's presence was like a force of nature. His hands were steady, his aim precise, and his movements graceful yet deadly. The first gunshot rang out, echoing across the mesa. Taye fired, a powerful shot that disarmed one of the bandits. Evelyn followed suit, shooting to scare rather than kill, her heart pounding as adrenaline surged. They worked in unison, a silent rhythm honed by years apart yet instinctively understood. One of the bandits lunged toward Evelyn, but Taye intercepted him, grabbing the man with the ease of someone twice his size. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement that trust had never been lost. He nodded slightly, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. A reminder that some bonds could never be broken. By the time the dust settled and the last of the bandits fled into the shadows, the homestead lay in partial ruin, but the people inside were safe. Smoke curled from the smoldering barn, and the cries of frightened animals filled the air. Evelyn lowered her weapon, breathing heavily, and looked at Taye. "You were incredible," she said softly, her voice a mixture of awe and relief. Taye's lips curved into a small, rare smile. "You're not too bad yourself," he replied, his tone teasing but gentle. "We make a good team." Evelyn felt a surge of something she had long buried: hope, trust, and perhaps love. The desert had tested them, separated them, and now it had brought them together again, stronger than before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into shadows, she realized that this was only the beginning. The Old West was harsh, and danger lurked at every turn. But Evelyn Hart and Taye faced it together, ready for whatever lay ahead. Their past was no longer a chain, it was a bond, unbroken and unyielding, a force that would carry them through the coming storms. The homestead smoldered behind them, the last wisps of smoke curling into the indigo sky. Evelyn Hart and Taye had guided the frightened family to safety, but the adrenaline that had coursed through them only moments ago began to ebb, leaving a heavier, more complex tension in its place. Evelyn dismounted first, her boots crunching on the dry earth, and let out a slow, measured breath. Taye's dark eyes scanned the horizon, as if expecting danger to reappear from the shadows at any moment. "You handled yourself well back there," Evelyn said softly, trying to keep her voice casual, though her chest still thumped from the rush of the fight. Taye's lips curved into a faint, rare smile. "You weren't too bad yourself," he replied, voice low, almost reverent. "I've seen fear before, but you never showed it." Evelyn glanced at him, heart racing. There was something in his tone, a softness she hadn't heard before, a recognition that reached past years of silence. For the first time since she had returned to Dry Creek, she felt that she could truly stand beside him, not as a stranger, not as someone testing him, but as someone who belonged. As night fell, they led the family to a small cave near the mesa, a hidden place Taye had remembered from years past. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that danced in rhythm with the wind whistling through the desert. Evelyn removed her jacket, brushing the dust from her sleeves, and set her revolver carefully beside the fire. "Taye," she began, hesitating, unsure how to phrase the question that had haunted her for years. "Back then, when we were together in the canyon, did you ever wonder if we'd see each other again?" Taye looked down at the fire, the dancing flames reflecting in his dark eyes. For a moment, the stoic warrior she had always known seemed to melt away, revealing the man beneath. "Every night," he admitted. "I remembered you in the quiet moments. The desert is lonely, Evelyn. But your face, your voice, they stayed with me." Her chest tightened. This was the confirmation she had waited for, the truth behind her risky game of pretending to forget him. She had wanted to see if he remembered, and he did, more vividly than she could have imagined. I had to know," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "I had to see if you remembered me, if the bond we shared mattered as much to you as it did to me." Taye rose from his seat by the fire and stepped closer, his muscular frame illuminated by the flames. He lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It did, he said simply. It always did. And it still does. Evelyn felt a shiver of emotion run through her, the weight of years and unspoken words finally lifting. But before they could linger in the moment, a rustle from the darkness reminded them that the desert was never truly safe. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to her revolver. Taye moved beside her, alert, the tension in his body coiled like a spring. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man on horseback, masked with a rifle slung across his back. Taye's eyes narrowed. A messenger, he muttered, noting the sigil on the man's cloak. From the gang we scattered earlier. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The danger they thought was behind them had not vanished. Taye read her expression and gave a reassuring nod. We face it together, he said. His hand brushed hers, brief but electric. In that small gesture, Evelyn felt the full weight of their bond, the trust, the shared history, the unspoken promise that they would not be separated again. The writer approached cautiously, hands raised. Taye and Evelyn exchanged a glance, a silent communication that had been honed over their shared past. Speak, Taye said, voice calm but commanding. The messenger dismounted and handed Taye a folded note. He glanced at it quickly, then looked back at Evelyn. The words on the page were short, but their meaning was clear. The bandits were regrouping, preparing something larger, something dangerous. Evelyn's stomach tightened, but she didn't panic. Then we need a plan, she said, determination hardening her voice. Taye nodded, his jaw set. We'll use the desert, the mesas, and the shadows, he said. We've survived worse. Together we can face anything. The night deepened around them, stars burning bright in the clear desert sky. Evelyn and Taye sat close by the fire, side by side, the danger outside serving only to strengthen the fragile, rekindled connection between them. The Old West was ruthless and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart felt something rare, certainty. No matter what storms lay ahead, she and Taye would face them together. The night was unusually quiet, the desert wind carrying only the faint scent of sage and distant smoke. Evelyn Hart and Taye had spent the hours after the messenger's arrival planning, their whispers blending with the crackle of the fire. Every detail mattered, every ridge, every canyon path, every shadow the moonlight could conceal. The bandits they had fought before were no longer a simple threat. They were organizing, growing bolder, and this time, the danger was personal. Evelyn brushed her fingers along the brim of her hat, a nervous habit she hadn't been able to shake. Do you think they'll come tonight? She asked softly. Though her voice carried a confidence, she was still convincing herself she possessed. Taye's eyes, dark and intense, scanned the horizon. His long black hair shimmered faintly in the firelight, and his tribal jewelry glinted as he moved. They're patient, he said slowly. They wait for the right moment, and when they strike, it will be without mercy. Evelyn swallowed, the weight of reality pressing on her. But beneath the fear, she felt a steady reassurance from Taye's presence. They had survived the desert, the bandits, and years apart. Together, they were unstoppable. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, a faint rustle on the ridge above the mesa caught Taye's attention. He tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. Evelyn's hand went to her revolver instinctively, though she trusted him implicitly. The figure of a horseman emerged, then another, shadowed and slow. It was the bandits, moving under the cover of darkness, unaware that their prey was already waiting. Taye gestured toward Evelyn, a subtle nod. Stay close, he whispered. His gaze swept the ridge with precision. Every detail, every shadow, every movement of the approaching riders was catalogued in his mind. He had fought in these conditions before, and the desert gave him a clarity that few could match. The first shot rang out, piercing the night. Taye fired with deadly accuracy, taking down a bandit before he even realized he was exposed. Evelyn followed, her shots aimed to disable rather than kill, a skill learned in the heat of their previous encounters. The night erupted in chaos, dust kicked up by hooves, shouts echoing across the canyon, and gunfire ringing sharp and metallic in the cold air. Taye moved like a force of nature, shirtless and powerful, every motion precise and controlled. Tribal jewelry clinking softly with his movements. Evelyn kept close, matching his rhythm, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, adrenaline, and a deep, unspoken longing. She had come here to test him, to see if he remembered, and now, facing danger side by side, she realized that memory was only part of what bound them. Action, trust, and courage tied them together far more tightly. Amid the chaos, a sudden figure emerged from behind a boulder, a former ally turned betrayer. The bandits had a spy in Dry Creek, someone who had been feeding them information about Evelyn and Taye's movements. Evelyn's heart lurched. Taye's eyes narrowed, the intensity in his gaze magnified by the firelight. "Stay behind me," he commanded, moving with fluid precision to intercept the spy. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed, trust in his every motion. The confrontation was swift. Taye disarmed the man, his movements efficient, merciless, but calculated. Evelyn caught her breath, watching him, feeling the familiar pull of admiration and emotion that she had tried to bury beneath her pretense. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, Taye turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "They've been organized, Evelyn," he said, voice low and serious. "We're dealing with more than a gang now. There's a plan, and they'll come back stronger." Evelyn nodded, resolve hardening within her. "Then we'll be ready," she said. Her hand brushed against his, a fleeting touch that carried weight, unspoken promises, and rekindled trust. The desert night stretched on, stars twinkling coldly above, the wind carrying secrets and whispers through the canyon. Evelyn Hart and Taye, bonded by memory, courage, and survival, knew that the coming days would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. Yet, in that moment, they also knew something else, whatever lay ahead. They would face it together, stronger than ever. The Old West was ruthless, full of betrayal and danger, but under the vast starlit sky, Evelyn and Taye had found something that transcended it all: connection, trust, and the unyielding power of remembered love. The first faint light of dawn painted the desert sky in shades of pale gold and violet. Evelyn Hart and Taye crouched behind a rocky outcrop, surveying the valley below. The bandits' camp, hidden in a low canyon, was now clearly visible, their fires smoldering and figures moving restlessly. The night's chaos had ended, but the danger had not. The spy's warning had given them an edge, and they had spent the long hours planning, resting, and sharpening their resolve. Evelyn adjusted her hat, her eyes never leaving Taye. He was shirtless, his muscular form outlined by the early light, tribal jewelry glinting subtly. His expression was calm but alert, each motion purposeful. Over the past days, she had seen more of him than she had in years' strength, courage, intelligence, and an unshakable moral code. But what had grown even stronger was their bond, tested and solidified through fire, blood, and trust. "We can't let them get away," Taye said quietly, his voice carrying over the silent desert. "They've caused enough destruction. We end this today." Evelyn nodded, gripping her revolver with both hands. "Together," she said. The word was simple, yet heavy with meaning. They had been separated by time, by circumstance, and by the cruel whims of the desert. But now they were united not just in purpose, but in heart. Moving like shadows, they descended the rocky path toward the canyon floor, keeping low and silent. The bandits were unaware of the predators closing in. Taye led, his movements fluid, every muscle coiled like a spring, every step calculated. Evelyn followed, matching his rhythm, trusting his instincts completely. Each glance they exchanged carried unspoken communication, a language built over years and trials. As they neared the camp, a lone rider appeared, attempting to leave with a message or warning. Taye acted first, his revolver flashing. A single shot disarmed the rider, sending him sprawling into the sand. Evelyn moved swiftly to secure the figure, her eyes meeting Taye's. No words were needed, they were in perfect sync. The attack was swift and decisive. Taye's movements were a storm of power and precision. Tribal jewelry clinking softly, muscles taut and graceful, each action measured to subdue without unnecessary cruelty. Evelyn was right beside him, her shots deliberate and controlled, taking down threats with calculated skill. The bandits, disoriented and terrified, were quickly subdued or fleeing into the distant desert. When the last gunshot faded, silence returned, broken only by the wind over the canyon. Evelyn and Taye stood among the defeated bandits, the weight of victory settling around them. Taye lowered his weapon, his dark eyes finding hers across the sandy expanse. "You never doubted me," he said softly, "even when I pretended not to remember. I knew you'd find me." Evelyn stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "And I needed to see if you remembered," she whispered. "I needed to know if this mattered as much to you as it did to me." Taye's gaze softened, the intensity giving way to something deeper, something raw and human. "It always did," he said. "Through every day, through every danger, through every mile of desert. It never left me." Evelyn felt a shiver run through her. After years of uncertainty, the games, the pretense, the waiting, she had the answer she had sought. Their bond was real, unbroken, and undeniable. As the sun rose higher, bathing the valley in golden light, Evelyn and Taye surveyed the desert stretching endlessly before them. The Old West was ruthless, unforgiving, and full of danger, but here, in the quiet after battle, they had carved a moment of peace, trust, and love. Taye offered his hand, and Evelyn took it, feeling the warmth of his grip, the unspoken promise of protection and partnership. They mounted their horses, side by side, ready to return to Dry Creek, to face whatever the future held together. The desert wind swept across the canyon, carrying whispers of the past and the promise of tomorrow. Evelyn Hart and Taye, bound by memory, courage, and an enduring bond, rode toward the horizon, their hearts lighter, their spirits unbroken, and their story complete. For the first time in years, both felt whole, not just as survivors of the Old West, but as two souls reunited, ready to face life, love, and whatever storms might come, together.